Hello and welcome to my new video related to Bitcoin education. In this video, I will discuss about the blockchain, so the technology behind Bitcoin or used by Bitcoin. In the last weeks, I spent a lot of time in order to understand it, and I will present what I've learned. It will be not about the computer science perspective, but mostly a technological perspective. In fact, if we see the materials that I have used, there are two books and two articles, and also in both books they say blockchain basics or the basic of blockchains. In fact, the books are the basic of blockchain of Bitcoin and blockchain, an introduction to cryptocurrency and the technology that powers them, and then blockchain basics, a non-technical introduction in 25 steps. And if you have a computer science degree, then the book Mastering Bitcoin is better for you. But without the computer science knowledge or background, I think these books are better in order to understand the basic of the blockchain. And then I used two other articles called Bitcoin is an idea and Bitcoin is time, both from their Gigi, and I strongly recommend, if you are interested, after this presentation, to plan time and spend time in order both to read the books and to read the articles. They're very great concepts there. Let's start with the purpose of Bitcoin. This is about the technological part. The main, as I said already in other videos, the main purpose of Bitcoin is a monetary proposition that Bitcoin represents the best form of money that we have ever had. But in this presentation, I will focus on the technological part. So which is the problem that Bitcoin is trying to solve? The problem is that till 2008, there were only two ways to transfer value. One was physically, the transfer of tokens. So example, via cash or gold. And second is digitally using a third party. So updating a ledger. The bank on PayPal, for example, once you move the transaction, the value digitally, what the bank and PayPal are doing is updating a ledger. And so far, there was no way to send value digitally without a third party. And this is exactly the Bitcoin breakthrough. In fact, Bitcoin breakthrough from technological perspective is that it allows to transfer money digitally without the need of the third party to handle and order the transactions. Bitcoin solves the double spending problem. It prevents that without a third party money can be double spent. Problem also known as the Byzantine generals problem. In fact, the Byzantine, if you deep dive on the Byzantine general problems, is that a special condition of a computer system where the system actors must agree on a concerted strategy, but some of these actors are unreliable. And the example is several Byzantine generals during a siege of a city that must agree on a particular time for an attack. And it developed to describe a situation in which, in order to avoid a catastrophic failure of the system, of a concerted strategy, the system actors must agree on a concerted strategy. But some of these actors, in fact, are unreliable. So how they decide which is the time they attack at the same time if they cannot connect, they cannot speak each other. That was the Byzantine generals' problem. And the goal of Bitcoin is to moving to a decentralized, a centralized world, what banks and PayPal are doing to update the ledgers once payments are made. Because in digitally is not the value, it's not really sent digitally, but it's like a communication to the third party, and the third party update a ledger. So it's not digital tokens that are moving. It's a ledger that is updated. And the blockchain is the technology used to reach that goal, avoiding the double spending issue. So avoiding that if there is no third party, one person can cheat the system or abuse the system and spend the money twice. The technologies that are used by Bitcoin are public key cryptography, peer-to-peer networks, digital signature, cryptographic as functions, cryptographic timestamps, hash chains, proof of work, and difficulty adjustment. Interesting for the people very interesting is that only the last one is the real new invention of Satoshi. All the other technology already existed, and it means that Satoshi was on the shoulder of giant who already created many different technology. Let's see here more in the deep. In fact, a common narrative, as I said, saying that Bitcoin is coming from nowhere. This is one of the statements I heard from other people that, yeah, but it's coming from nowhere, so I don't trust Bitcoin. What is the reality? In reality, Bitcoin is the results of 40 years of research and with several attempts of creating digital money. During the years, there have been tentatives of digital money like eCash, eGold, Hashcash, BitGold, BMoney, RPOW, called also reusable proof of work by Hal Finney. And Hal Finney was the person who was the second person running Bitcoin after Satoshi Nakamoto. All of them uses several technology used already by Bitcoin, but they had two big leakages. They were firstly they were centralized, or at least centralized. There was still a bit of centralization. You need an entity who was or was coordinating something. Even if so, the centralization was minimized, but was still there. And they had the problem of inflating the money with time because the difficulty adjustment was not invented. And one first recommendation for me, if someone is saying that Bitcoin is coming from nowhere, this person has absolutely no clue about Bitcoin. And please disregard each of his statements about Bitcoin because their value is really equal to zero. Let's start with some technology. This video will be much longer than other videos I did because blockchain is quite complex. So in case you don't have so much time, I recommend maybe you can split in sections, maybe 20 minutes via 20 minutes. The other videos I made, they were like 5, 10, 15 minutes, but it will be longer because to understand a concept like a blockchain, it takes more time. Let's start with three different technology. Firstly is a cryptography. Cryptography is a technology used to send secret messages that can be read only by the intended recipient. Many people think that the blockchain is encrypted, but it is not. So blockchain is available and visible to everyone, but cryptography is used in the blockchain. And let's start with encryption and decryption. Encryption is the process of turning a readable text in a ciphertext, unreadable text, so that it cannot be read by anyone who doesn't have a special key, who know the code. Decryption is the process to turn the encrypted text in a readable text. And there are two types of cryptography, symmetric and asymmetric. The most known is symmetric. Symmetric encryption is used when the key to encrypt and decrypt is this message is the same. For example, if two people they decide they use the letter after the real letter they want to use, for example, AAA, encrypted become BBB. So I send a message BBB. The person has my same key, so he knows that which is the key, and the person decrypt the message and he knows that I want to say AAA. Public key cryptography, the technology used in Bitcoin, use asymmetric cryptography, where there are two different keys. One is used to encrypt a message and another to decrypt. So in public key cryptography, conventionally they are called private key and public key, but in reality they are different key, but we use, they can also be interchanged, but we commonly say public key and private key because one key is secret, one key is public. But you can use the first key to encrypt and the second key to decrypt, or you can use the second key to encrypt and the first key to decrypt. And it will be the same, at the end, it will be the same results. And the problem with symmetric cryptography is that a person needs to trust every person he communicates the key. But with asymmetric cryptography, there is no need because you can use you can use your private key in order to encrypt a message, and then everyone will use the public key to decrypt. Or you can use from a test, it can be use your public key in order to encrypt the message, and this message can be decrypted only by you because you have the private key. That's the difference, and we will see also this topic later. From private key to public key, how Bitcoin choose go from private key to a public key? So firstly, it's generated a private key and is a random number between 0 and 2 elevated to 156 minus 1. It's a huge number. You see that it's not also not possible to think how big it is and how many options there are. And Bitcoin technology use elliptic curve digital signature algorithm in order to create a public key. The function, this kind of function is made that from the private key is easy to calculate the public key, but from the public key it's practically impossible to calculate the private key. It's like you have a lot of people, like 8 billions, and you have fingerprint. If you know the person, if you choose one person, then it's easy to see which are the fingerprints. So like if you choose one person, then the person will be the private key. Then you can find the private key, meaning, sorry, the public key, because you see which is the fingerprint of this person. But if you have only the public key, the fingerprint, you have to test every single person in order to reach which is the private key. And you see the number, how huge is it? Is many digits, so it's practically impossible to find the private key from the public key. Second technology will be the hash functions. So what is the hash functions? It's a series of mathematical steps or algorithms that you can perform on some input data, resulting in a hash, a new value. So you have some on a word or some collection of digits or letters. You process this hash, and you have a new value. That's called also the hash. And these hash functions have five characteristics. One is deterministic, means so the same message always result in the same hash. So if you want to you say hello and you hash this value, it will always have the same result. Second, it is weak to compute the hash value from any given message, and you can easily go forward. So you can always hash the new message very easy and is quick. The third will be one-way function. It is not feasible to generate a message from its hash value except by trying all the possible messages. So also here, complex maths, it's not possible to go from the hash value to the original message. And meaning you can go backwards. Fourth, is pseudo-random. A small change to a message should change the hash value so extensively that the new hash value appear uncorrelated with the old hash value. So if you change one letter or two letters from a sentence that you want to hash, then you cannot, you will have a very different result. Fifth, last one, collision resistance. It is not feasible to find two hash messages with the same hash value. An example of hash functions is SHA-256, and they are using in the mining process as identifiers for transactions and as identifiers for blocks. So also hash function is a very important technology that would allow a person to understand Bitcoin technology because it's used. Let's see an example of hash function. So you have, for example, AJAO, you do the hash, and you obtain a code. And obtain code is always the same length, and they are the hash that you get is composed by 16. Each digit is composed by 16 different digits. Therefore, they are used from 0 to 9 and from A to F. All the digits you will see, they can be or a number, a digit from 0 to 9, or one letter from A to F, because we are talking about the 16 different digits. And there are so it's also said composed by hexadecimal decimal numbers. And there are five different patterns for the hash functions. So first is independent hashing, where the hashing is applied to each piece of data separately. You have a hello or a word and you hash it. Second, repeated hashing, where you can hash a hash value, obtaining a new hash. And the third will be combined hashing, where you can combine a more piece of data and combine and obtain one hash. So you can have hello and you have a hello and then word, you combine them and you obtain a new hash. And then fourth is sequential hashing, where you have one piece of data and you combine the hash obtained with another piece of data, obtaining a new hash value. Last one, so it's like you have mm, a word, then you hash it, then you combine this hash with another word, and you hash all of them, obtaining another hash. And the fifth is hierarchical, where you combine two hash values, obtaining a new hash. It's possible to have two hashes, like you have one word is one hash, a second word is another hash. You combine both of the hash and you obtain another hash. These are the hash functions. Okay, it's now time to start the steps from a centralized to a decentralized system. Every centralized system has a list of accounts associated with the respective balance, and another list where each customer has also a username and a PIN password. This will be every bank or PayPal. They have both a list of all the accounts with the relative balance, and also for every account there is also the username and PIN password. So let's start. There will be in total 11 steps in order to move from a centralized to a decentralized world. And we need to go through all of them in order to understand the magic, how magic and how smart was the idea of Satoshi Nakamoto, and how big is the breakthrough that blockchain is representing for the world. And let's start with the first one. For the first one, so the problem, imagine that we start, we have a centralized system. The problem is the account needs permission and authentication, which is the solution to use public keys as account numbers. We saw already the public keys, how they works, and the public keys generate the addresses, so will be like the account numbers, and the private keys is the PIN and the password. So you don't need the permission for entering the Bitcoin. You need the software to generate the private keys. Then you use the mathematical algorithm that Bitcoin is using, and you generate the public keys. The private key is a list generally of 24 words representing a 256-bit number. And an example of Bitcoin addresses is a long word composed by hexadecimal numbers. So that would be the first step. You don't need any more account, and you don't need permission. Everyone can join without asking permission to a third party. Then the second problem will be, if you have a list of account that you don't need a central, but you need the transactions you make needs authentication. In order to be authenticated, you need to use which is the proposition from Satoshi Nakamoto, is to use digital signature. So to authorize a transaction means we have to prove that it is really us making transactions. And so far, we are using unwritten signatures for paper document and electronic signatures for electronic document. Bitcoin uses digital signatures in order to authorize a transaction. And also it sounds that it's new, but in reality, the invention of digital signature is 46 years old. In fact, the invention was made in 1976. And digital signatures utilize both public key cryptography and cryptographic hash functions. We already discussed about public key cryptography and hash functions, and let's see how that works. How digital signature works is really interesting. So firstly, I decide which message I want to send. Let's say hello. Second, I decide, okay, for example, hello. As second step, I hash the message, obtaining a hash number that for simplicity is shown here with a very short number of digits. In reality is much higher. Then I use my private key in order to encrypt the hash. This message is authenticated because it can only be sent by me. And let's see in the next slide why. Because then I send this message to the recipient together with the encrypted message with the hash function. So the recipient receive hello and receive the hash function. So what the recipient does, firstly, so that now you then use my public key that are known to everyone. Sorry, first step, he take the message and he hash the message, obtaining a code. Secondly, he then use my public key that are known to everyone to decrypt the message, obtaining again a hash function. If both hashes are the same, then the message is authenticated because it can have been written only by someone who owns the private key. So this method is used in Bitcoin to authenticate the transfer of value by signing a transaction and by verifying a transaction. So it can be sent only by me if these two values are the same. With this step, we remove the need to have a centralized list of username and password because you have account, you have the PIN, and then the transaction don't need to be authenticated. Now, let's start with step three, which is the step three. So the problem is that we still have a central authority to list all the balance for every account and to order correctly all the transaction. So, okay, the transaction are authenticated, we have the account, but you still need this central authority. The need of this bookkeeper represents the next problem, but the solution is to replicate the book that the central authority is in a decentralized world. So there will not be anymore only one bookkeeper, but anyone in the world can be a bookkeeper and he doesn't need to ask permission. All bookkeepers have the same seniority. Every individual with a computer and adequate storage and access to internet can download some software, connect a few neighbors, and become a bookkeeper. You can see here in the slide where there are a lot of computers connecting together, and each computer has a ledger, and it can track the account, can track the balance, and so on. So we are with this step, we replicate the need of a central bookkeeper. We don't need one. It's important that everyone can be a bookkeeper. Now that let's go to step four. Now we have a decentralized system that keeps track of the transactions. But how we are making sure that every bookkeeper is ordering the transaction in the same way? Consider that we are having hundreds of transactions being created anywhere in the world. So we have a lot of transactions. How we are sure that every bookkeeper is keeping the same order of transaction? And this is also another problem. In fact, the geography, technology, connectivity, internet traffic influence the speed of transaction. It can be that a bookkeeper lists transaction A before B and another bookkeeper lists transaction B before A. But then it will not be one common ledger, but it will be two different ledger, and the decentralized system will not work. Then the real problem is how we do represent the real problem, or the problem behind is how do we represent time in the decentralized world? Because in the physics, and this is a concept I will come back, and it's very important for people to know. That's the biggest problem: how you represent time in a decentralized world, and we will discuss also about this later. In the physical realm, we use token, cash, like cash. So if I give you cash, at the moment I give to you, I don't have anymore. So cash is timeless, or tokens are timeless. But ledgers not. Ledgers need a time, and PayPal and banks, they always have a central authority who decide to list the order. But in a decentralized world, there is no time. You cannot trust every person in the that has a bookkeeper because they can cheat the system. In a centralized world where there is one clock, but in the decentralized world, everyone has a different clock, and people can abuse it, saying that their transaction was made before it was effectively made. The mindset of a decentralized system should be always that it should prevent unethical behaviors so that it is resistant from any attack or abuse. Bitcoin solves the solution with blocks, or in other words, keeping the time one block at a time. Keep this in mind because we will come back. There will be a sequence of block and one block at a time. And also Satoshi Nakamoto, when created the Bitcoin and the blockchain, always put himself with the mindset that people can abuse and they want to cheat. That's the only way where a system can be really resistant. Because if you have always, you can trust every person, it will be much easier to have a ledger, a common ledger, but in reality, people can abuse it. So you should prevent all this abuse. How the blocks works. Now let's see how blocks works. Firstly, we cannot control how many transactions are made, but we can control the data entry into the ledger. So we record transaction in badges, page by page, instead of transaction by transaction. Each of these pages is called a block. Imagine that is a book. You have a book, and every page is a block. And blocks are created less frequently than transactions. In average, one block every 10 minutes, making it easier to propagate them via the network. The bookkeeper has now two functions. Firstly, validating and propagating pending transaction, and secondly, validating, storing, and propagating block of transaction. At this point, the bookkeepers don't need to agree on the order of transaction, but on the order of blocks. Once the block is considered valid, it is propagated across the network. We will come back on this also later when we discuss about how exactly are ordered. But the main message is that with the creation of blocks every 10 minutes, all the bookkeepers don't need to agree in every single transaction, but they need to agree in the pages of transaction. So they are less frequently, one every 10 minutes. And the main goal is always to validating and propagating pending transaction. This word validating is very important because they are validating that the transaction is correct, that the address is correct, that the person has enough Bitcoin, that the recipient's address is correct as well. And so they do also they are proving that everything is correct. Okay, this is important. So as said, they need to agree not anymore in every single transaction, but they need to agree on blocks that are less frequent, so it's easier to agree. Okay, so let's go step 5. Who can create block and how often? And the solution will be proof of work. I think you heard these terms many times discussing about Bitcoin. So at this point, we have transactions bundled in blocks, and bookkeepers agree on the order of blocks that are propagated around the network. The next problem is who can create the blocks and how often. We don't have or we don't want a central authority to create the blocks. Otherwise, we will be back with a centralized system. Therefore, everyone should be able to create blocks without permission. But then we have the issue, how do we make sure that blocks are created not too quickly and not too slowly? A person can create a block in 1 minute, in 2 minutes, in 20 minutes, or 15 minutes. So we could establish a rule that the bookkeeper wait at least 10 minutes before accepting a block. But this rule in a decentralized world can be cheated because there is no unique clock. So always with the perspective that people can cheat or can abuse the system. So we cannot go in this way. So what we can do, we could also decide to assign it randomly, but also in this case, we will need a central authority to, let's say, roll the dice. And we don't want, as we said, we don't, the last thing that we want is to have a central authority. As I said, the solution is a very smart one, an elegant one. Is called proof of work. How it works? All block creators have to play and win a competition. It's like a global competition among all block creators. A game of chance a game of chance over the whole network that takes specific time to play, on average 10 minutes. The game should give all blockaders an equal chance to win and needs to have a public deployable proof that the winner can prove they have won. That's a characteristic. The game also must be not cheatable. You should not be able to cheat. Each creator takes a list of pending transactions and builds a block with them. So he's taking all the pending transactions in the system and create a block with them in a specific format. He then calculates a cryptographic hash of the block's data. And the rule of the game is that if the hash number is less than a specific target number, the block is considered a valid block and can be propagated to other bookkeepers. If the hash is higher, the bookkeeper needs to change the data of the block and try with a new hash. One of the data present in the block is called nonce, used like meaning used only once, so that the bookkeeper keep trying new hash, just changing the nonce. We will see the structure of the block in one of the next step. So the idea is to have this big competition where all the people can participate. They collect the data, try with adding the nonce, so it's another word or another code, and then hashing all this data. If the hash is lower than the target, then the block is valid. If it is higher, then they have to try again. fact, for example, let's look for simplicity. Let's look at an example. If for a simplified example, where in reality the number are much higher, but then it's hard to understand. Let's do a simplified example with the hash that goes from 0 to 1 million, and the target is 100. So the first block, let's say the target number is 100. The block creator is using different nonce till when the hash function of the block's data is less than the target. It does this repeatedly till when it finds a valid block. This process is called mining, and the blocks creator are called miners. The process is tedious and repetitive. In the media, you always heard that the miners have to solve complex mathematical equations, but it's not true. It's not true. They have just to continuously and tediously repeat a process till when the result is less than the target, the hash target. So here in example with the nonce 0, the number is higher than 100. So we try again. With nonce 1 is 76,000, too high. With nonce 2, it is 234,000, again too high. With 3 as nonce, the number is should have been 0.76. It's a mistake, and the number is valid. But it should have been 76, not 876. Let's see some characteristic of proof of works. So of the mining, or also called the mining process. At first, the chance of winning the competition, finding the number that is less than the hash number that is less than the target number, is proportional of how much hashing a power miner has. If you have one PC, you can try, let's say, 15 times per second, just an example. If you have three PC, then it will be 45 times per second. But this PC can also, they are very effective, and they can try many, many times per second. And considering that the process is computationally expensive, there is no chance to cheat. A person can create many accounts, but without the necessary computational energy, he will not have high chances to win the competition. The system works so that to find the solution is very hard, but to verify is very easy. So a person just needs to compare the hash number with the target hash. It is like similar to a complex Sudoku, where to find the solution is very hard, but to verify that the Sudoku is correct is quite easy. Proof of work, in fact, avoid the Sybil attack, an attack where a network is overwhelmed. Okay, we have now to the next step. Now we established the competition. We said, okay, who create the blocks? The miners, and how with this competition. But now that we have miners who create the blocks, but how we can incentivize them to create blocks, because energy costs money, and they will not create money without an incentive. An external payment will not work. Firstly, because we will not need a central authority to control it. And again, we don't want a central authority. Second, using fiat currency will not work either, because it is held in bank and banks can freeze the accounts. What will work will be an internal or an intrinsic incentivation, like a transaction fee, a small amount of value for each transaction. This is the first way how the system is incentivized miners. But the transaction fee reward will work only when there are many transactions every 10 minutes. And this we go to step 7, 7 out of 11. How we do incentivize miners in the period with low transaction? So a solution, the system is that the system will reward every miner who has created a valid block with new Bitcoins, a quantity that will decrease over time. In fact, miners received 50 bitcoins per block in the period 2009-2012, 25 bitcoins per block between 2012 and 2016, and 12.5 bitcoins per block during the period 2016-2020. The quantity decrease is a phenomenon known as halving, necessary to keep the scarcity of Bitcoin. Let's move now to step 8. One topic back regarding to the halving. I made also another video what is the halving. It's about the monetary proposition. We cannot like money to be money should be scarce. So if we always keep the same pace, how much money are created every 10 minutes, the scarcity will not be kept. That's why every 4 years, the amount of money every 10 minutes will decrease. The problem now is the next problem is generated by the technology. Because if the speed of finding a hash is less than the target, depends on computational power. So with the advanced technology, the computational power will increase, and therefore Bitcoin will be mined faster. So if in this year you need 10 minutes to create a block, in 2 years with PC and technology advancing, you will have much more computational power. Even if it's half, with the halving, the amount of blocks will be less, but you can create many more blocks and therefore to create much more money in the same time. So you can create a huge supply and consequently decrease the value of each unit. The more supply you create, the less the value of the unit is. So this was the problem. This was the problem of the other tentatives of digital money creation, like BitGold and BitMoney. There were two protocols never really implemented, uh, consisting in many technology used already by Bitcoin, but were highlighting the issue of huge, were also both highlighting the issue of huge supply without finding a solution. Satoshi Nakamoto, with a difficulty adjustment, found a solution to counteract the progress of technology. In fact, thanks to the difficulty adjustment, every 2016 blocks, meaning every 2 weeks in average, the difficulty changes according to the average of the previous 216 blocks. In case the average time to mine the block in the last 2 weeks was higher than 10 minutes, so the miner took more time, the difficulty adjustment will decrease so that in the next 2 weeks will take less time and maybe 10 minutes or more closer to 10 minutes. On the other side, if the time to mine a block, the average time is lower than 10 minutes, then Bitcoin are created too fast, so the difficulty adjustment will increase. With this system, the blocks will be mined in average always every 10 minutes, not maybe mathematically, but circa 10 minutes, and that's enough. And Bitcoin supply can keep the plan to become more and more scarce over time. Something about the monetary proposition. At the moment, the 19.1 million Bitcoin have already created, more than 90%. So it means that less than in the first, it started 2009, we are in 2012, so it's in 2022, in 13 years, they have been created 91% and more than 90% of Bitcoins. And in the last 118 years, because the last Bitcoin will be mined in 2140, only less than 10% of Bitcoin will be created. So it will be more scarce and scarce. And to be more precise, at the moment, the scarcity is similar to gold. In 2 years, when we will have the next halving, the Bitcoin will be the scarcest asset on Earth. Now we are approaching the last steps in order to create a complete decentralized world. And we are now at the point where we have transactions bundled into blocks, which are like pages in a book. But we have now the problem of ordering the blocks that I also discussed in another step. Yes, we decide we have blocks, we have miners who compete, miners are incentivized, we make sure that the blocks are every 10 minutes in average, but how we order the blocks? And but in the decentralized digital world, there is no clock. There is no unique time. Here I'm coming back to the topic I told before. The biggest problem is there is no time. In fact, time, what we see is two characteristics. One is causality and one is unpredictability. The solution will be the blockchain. Now we will see how it will work. But before, let's start spending some time about what does mean causality and unpredictability. Causality, firstly, in the let's say kidnapping world, it is an example from the book. It's interesting, a bit strange, but it's very interesting. How kidnappers make sure or say to the world that the person is still alive when they say, okay, was still alive till yesterday. They cannot use a calendar because if they use a calendar, they can fake this calendar, so they can cheat. So they use, let's say, because they could have easily falsified this. They use newspaper of a particular day to demonstrate that the person was alive the day the newspaper came out. So it means that there was a cause, something happened, and you are sure that this person was alive, or this effect, so the picture was taken after. So this is not about the kidnapping in sí, but it's mostly about the causality. This, you are sure that these pictures has been created after the newspaper was released. Causality is, in fact, is related to Bitcoin is the reason why cryptographic hash functions are so crucial when it comes to timestamping document in cyberspace. They introduce a causal relationship because it's not possible to create a hash function without having the document in the first place. For now, important as you keep in mind this causality that there is, like in this case, the picture cannot be made before the newspaper was created. So there was a cause and there was an effect, something that happened after the first event. The second characteristic is unpredictability. With authentication by newspaper, fatigue kidnappers rely on something that could not have been predicted in advance. You never know the day before which newspaper, what will be written by the newspaper, except the author of the newspaper. In fact, Bitcoins relies upon two sources of unpredictability, transactions and proof of work. Just like nobody can predict what tomorrow's newspaper will look like, nobody can predict what the next Bitcoin block will look like. You can predict what transactions are going to be included because you cannot predict what transactions are going to be broadcast in the future. And more importantly, you can predict who will find the solution to the current proof of work puzzle and what the solution will be. It's very important to understand both because both they're part of the time in the decentralized world. So now let's go back with this knowledge. Let's go back to the solution proposed by Satoshi Nakamoto. It's called time stamping and is used also causality and unpredictability. Firstly, it is not a new invention. In fact, Bayer, Haber, and Stornetta in 1992, they said that to establish that a document was created after a given moment in time, it is necessary to report events that could not have been predicted before they happened. And this is exactly the case. The kidnapper could not have predicted which was which newspaper, but they used the newspaper once it was created, something unpredictable, or the content was unpredictable, to demonstrate that their picture was taken after this event. And also, what Satoshi Nakamoto wrote in his in the paper, in the Bitcoin paper, white paper, he said, in this paper we propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer distributed timestamp server to generate computational proof of the chronological order of transactions. Instead, each of having a block number like each page of the book as a page number, each block refers to the previous block by its hash. Therefore, it's not possible to create a new block without knowing the hash of the previous block. In this way, Satoshi Nakamoto brilliantly found a solution to recreate time in a decentralized world. In fact, you can see here in the picture the first block as an hash, and among the data of the second block, there is also the hash of the first block. And you cannot create the second, you cannot know the hash before the first block was created. And there will be the same logic with the third, the fourth, and the fifth block. One of the data of each block is also the hash function of the data of the previous block. Let's look more in the details at chain of blocks. That's why it's called blockchain, and the Merkle tree. These are also two very interesting topics. Let's say each block contains, for simplicity, 5 values. The nonce is used by the miners who build a valid block. As said, if they try once, it doesn't work, they should not change all the other data. It's good to have one number that they can change repeatedly. So far, they don't find a block, or they don't get the information that another person found a block. And the nonce, okay, this determining causality. So first is the nonce used by the miners. Then we have the hash of the previous block, and this determining causality, as you can see here. And then the timestamp when the competition to mine that block started, because and then the difficulty adjustment for that block. As I said, this difficulty adjustment change every 2 weeks. And so they got also how much is the difficulty adjustment for this. It will be like the target, the hash target. And then the root of the Merkle tree that represent of list of transactions included in that block. In fact, the Merkle tree is an efficient way to list of transactions. You can see below in the slide. Let's say for simplicity that a block has only 8 transactions. Each transaction will have a hash, and they will be combined in a couple of hashes to make a new hash. So for example, the hash of T1 and the hash of T2 will be combined in hashed, creating the hash T12. So you have two transactions, you hash both, and then you hash both of the hashes. You create T12. Then you hash T12 with T34, and you create T hash T14. The same from 5 to 8, and then you have two hashes, T14 and T58, and the hash of both of these data, it will be the root of a Merkle tree. This is so that the block, it doesn't contain so many data in the block itself, but it's a reference of all the transactions. And these are the most important things that are contained in each block. Then let's go for step 10. A further problem we can encounter is that more than one valid block are created at the same time. How does the bookkeeper recognize which is the valid one? Satoshi introduced a protocol called the longest chain rule. The longest chain is the chain that should be considered the chain of the longest chain on record. And the block that is discarded is called an orphan. The transactions in the orphan block, in case they have not been part of the valid block, will be considered unconfirmed, and they will be included in later blocks. So whenever a miner create a valid block, this block consider the miners and the nodes are all interconnected. It will be propagated among all the bookkeepers. But it can be that two valid blocks are created at the same time. So how the system is deciding which is, and according to they use the longest chain rule. Let's see an example. We have a situation that after we have block A1, 2, 3, and then block after that is created block B4, 5, 6. But then there are two blocks created, C7, 8, 9, and D1, 4, 5. How the system, all the nodes can, all the bookkeepers can agree on which is exactly the block that will be valid and which not. They have to wait time, few minutes, where in fact, and after new blocks are created, when the next block is created, for example, A160, and this block is attached to C789. So a node will receive both C79 and D145, but seeing that the block E167 is attached to C789, the longest blockchain is the one with the block C789. So it decides this as the valid block. And the block D145 become a orphan. And all the transactions included in D145 and not in C789 will be considered unconfirmed, and they will be included in one of the next blocks. Okay, and then we have the last step is called the double spend, and the solution will be to wait about 6 blocks. The longest chain rule can create mischief in a deliberate double spending. Follow me please in these steps. For example, a buyer want to buy a car, create two transactions using the same Bitcoin, one to the retailer, so one to the car companies, and one to himself. The buyer, so the buyer broadcasts the transaction containing the payment to the retailer. The retailer see the payment added in the honest block and send the good to the buyer. At the moment, there will be then two blocks, one with one transaction, another with another transaction. But at the moment, both blocks are valid. And the buyer secretly create longer chain of blocks, which excludes the payment to the retailer and include the payment to himself. Then the buyer published the longer chain so that nodes will consider the block with the buyer paying to himself as valid. When the original payment to the retailer will be included in a new block, it will be considered invalid because the bitcoins are already spent, and if they are spent for himself. So the buyer received the goods, but the retailer didn't receive the money, and this is a problem, which will be the solution to wait about 6 blocks. In fact, the common advice is for expensive goods to wait about 6 blocks after the transaction has been registered in a valid block. At this point, the amount of mining or amount of energy that has to be done to create to a competing chain longer than the existing is considered enormous and practically not possible to cheat. So for expensive goods, it's always good to wait 6 blocks, or let's say 1 hour, and once a transaction um, is uh, is visible and is validated, then it will remain. And in fact, important, that's also one of breakthrough of Bitcoin, of Satoshi Nakamoto, using the energy. That's why also proof of work is important. The blockchain, it will be immutable. After 6 blocks, it's considered almost impossible to change the chain. And also another important thing is Bitcoin, yes, is digital money, but it works like a digital cash. If you receive 1 Bitcoin and you want to spend zero point 0.3 Bitcoin, there will be then 2 transactions. You send zero point 0.3 Bitcoin sent to the address of the retailer, and zero point 0.7 Bitcoin sent to another address that belong anyway to you. It's like if you have cash, if you have 10 euro, then you want to pay 2 euro, you get 8 euro back. Um, while if you have with the bank, if you have 1,000 euro, and then you want to spend 15 euro with a credit card, is not taking specific 15 euro, but is just decreasing the 15 euro from your bank account that say 1,000 euro, so you will have 985 euro. Okay, we finish now with the 11 steps. In this way, we moved completely from a centralized system to a decentralized system for transfer value without the need of a central authority who has to exist in order to order the transaction and make sure that everything is correct. As I said before we finish, I recommend to really also, if you're interested, to read the books and the articles, but I hope that these steps give you more information in order to understand how blockchain works. Which are the main points? Firstly, thanks to the blockchain, Satoshi Nakamoto resolved the double spending problem. Every technology used, a part of the difficulty adjustment, was already created in the last 40 years. The geniality of Satoshi was to use and to combine them, adding the difficulty adjustment. This mix allowed to create the first decentralized system that can be used to transfer value, or let's say, or money. Smart rules with the proof of work for an entity that has a lot of computational power, it is more profitable to play with the rules than to go against the rules. So joining self-interest with community interest, and then hard to solve, easy to verify. It is very costly to find a hash that is less than the target, so it's very energy spent. You need to spend a lot of energy, but verifying is costless. The example of Sudoku. That's why to find a block, to mine a block is very hard and it takes 10 minutes. But then to verify the blocks for the other nodes to verify is very easy and fast. That's why the block can be propagating in the system. And the blocks, in fact, once created, can be easily spread among the networks. So this was about the technological revolution of Bitcoin. Let's discuss also in general, and this is the presentation regarding blockchain is ended. Now I want to discuss about the general proposition of Bitcoin. What I think is that Bitcoin is a technological and financial leap forward for humanity. Why I think that? Because there are three breakthroughs in once. Firstly, monetary proposition with its absolutely scarcity and its properties that makes it a perfect assets to be sellable across time, space, and scale. Bitcoin is the best form of money we have ever had. A breakthrough in the monetary history. So first, breakthrough in monetary history. Secondly, as we just discussed in this presentation, with the Bitcoin blockchain, we can finally send value digitally without the need of a central authority. This is a technological breakthrough. Two, Third, energy proposition. Bitcoin mining is the only technology that can make use of excess of energy, surplus of energy, and stranded energy, all renewable, and also a breakthrough in the energy industry. So we have three breakthroughs in once. I don't know any other technology that can have such a big impact in the world. But then people can ask, oh, if it is so important and nothing, there is no case in the past, why then it is not so well recognized worldwide? Because it's very hard to fully understand it. Most of the people don't understand it. Some people understand a bit of it, but very, very few people fully understand it. Why? Because firstly, it's a new technology. Every new technology, also like car, when the car was created, energy, internet, most of the people were against it because they didn't really get it. Because it's a new technology, it's hard to understand. But secondly, because Bitcoin is very, very complex. It contains finance, economics, investing, monetary history, human psychology, philosophical politics, history, game theory, complex math, technology, computer science, energy industry. In order to fully understand Bitcoin, a person needs to acquire knowledge in each of these fields. And at least 100 hours of study are required to appreciate it, and many more to fully understand it. So it's very hard and very complex. But barely no one did this effort because it looks like that everyone is busy with something else. I always tell people are interested in Bitcoin when I start to say all the topics, monetary, energy, industry, blockchain is very hard to understand. Most of the people give up because the common way say is okay, I'm too busy, I don't have time. Okay, for me, but it will be for me will be the biggest revolution of this decade. It makes sense to spend time on this. At the end, it doesn't really exist. I don't have time. It's all about priorities. And in fact, without the necessary knowledge, the average person is stuck with the misleading statements in the common narrative. For example, many people are saying it has no intrinsic value, or is used by criminals, or I cannot touch it, there were no trust, it's not backed by anything, it's bad for the environment, or it can be banned, or it is too expensive, it doesn't yield periodic earnings, it's only for rich people, or most of the financial institutions are not in favor of it. And these are many reasons that people use, but these statements can all be debunked with knowledge and education. But it's hard. It's not just in half an hour you learn and you debunk. You need time. And in fact, what Bitcoiners believes is that with time, by one, they will be all debunked. Also, the car, there was a lot of skepticism for the airplane as well, for the electricity, for internet. But people who really understood, they waited time, and at the end, because what they understood was the truth, because they spent a lot of time, then the world understood it. So Bitcoiners are patient, I am patient, and they are waiting that the world understand Bitcoin. And the recommendation I'm doing is always spending time in learning Bitcoin, in learning about Bitcoin. I never recommend people to invest directly in Bitcoin. If I recommend, there will be just a few hundred euros, because if you spend a few hundred euros, or if you think that you will lose, it will not bother you. Let's say 200 or 300 euros, and you have skin in the game, so it will push you more to understand about Bitcoin. But the recommendation will be always to spend time in learning about Bitcoin. And according to what you learn and you think and you believe and your conviction, then you can invest in Bitcoin. But it should be always correlated in your conviction, related to your conviction. The conviction is coming with education. That's all for this presentation. I hope that you learn from what I said. I really enjoyed every time, and see you in the next presentation. Bye.